Okay. Good evening, and welcome to the regular monthly meeting of the Unified Government. For those of you at home who are watching on television, it's Charter 180, and on the internet, it is Athens-Clarke.com. Agendas can be found on the right as you exit the room. We ask that if you have an electronic device, that you would turn it to silence or to off. We would ask that you be respectful of each speaker when they come to the podium. Ms. Spratlin has a timer on her desk that will be green for 2.5 minutes, and it will turn amber for 30 seconds. And when the light turns red, we would ask you to have completed your comments. There will be 4 opportunities tonight to speak. One will be on the consent agenda. The second will be on old and new business. The third will be on zoning, which is a little different. We'll explain that to you when we get to that point. And on the last, then the 4th time will be to speak on any item that is not on the agenda. I am Harry Sims. I am the Mayor Pro Tem of Athens. Our illustrious mayor is out of town, and so I fill in when she's not in. And we are excited tonight. We have a special, before we actually start our meeting, we have a very special group of people who have come from miles and miles away across the street over at the University of Georgia. But we are excited. These are Olympians and Paralympians that are in our community, and we are very delighted about that. So I'm going to step down here. We have a proclamation that we want to issue to several of our Olympians who are here with us tonight in the room. I am not planning on destroying their names, so I'm going to, when they come up here, I'm going to ask them to give you their names, and that way it will be said correctly. See, I told you I'd figure it out. So those reserved seat guests, would you please come up here and join me behind the rail? I think the only name that I probably would have gotten right is Coach Barley, but I said rather than mess up anybody up, I'm going to let them do it. But before I do read this proclamation, tomorrow begins the Paralympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and we have, let me get the name right, Mr. Jared Wallace, who is competing in the Paralympics. And he is an alumni and a local resident and a former student at the University of Georgia. He will be competing on Thursday at 4:45 in the 100 meters, and with the finals on Friday at 6:58. And he will also be competing in the 4x100 relay on Monday at 4:30. So tune in. Don't just think about the Olympics as being the Olympics, but the Paralympics is just as important. If you will walk up here and state your name, and then you can step back.
Hi, my name is Kendall Williams.
Hey, my name is Kar Saluri.
My name is Katora Orji.
Hey, my name is Leondia Kalenu.
My name is Eugene Tom Fang.
And my name is Michael Wibo.
And my name is Jack Barley.
Like I said, you see, I would have messed it up, so we don't even try. But like I said, we are truly excited that we have these people who have performed, and we saw most of them perform, even though we don't see the coach, he's behind the scenes, but he's there making a big difference. Athens-Clarke County Olympian and Para-Olympian Day. Whereas the University of Georgia is an integral part of the Athens-Clarke County community, and the two have grown and flourished side by side since their establishment. And whereas Athens, Georgia, takes its name from Athens, Greece, which hosted the first Olympic Games of the modern era in 1896. And whereas Athens-Clarke County and the University of Georgia celebrated their roles in 2016 during the 20th anniversary of hosting the world to the community during the competition as part of the 1996 Atlanta Olympic Games. And whereas the University of Georgia was represented by students, alumni, and staff at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil at the Games of the 31st Olympiad during August 6th through the 21st, and the 2016 Paralympic Games during September 7th through the 18th. And whereas students, alumni, and staff of the University of Georgia are valued members of the Athens-Clarke County community, and whereas the University of Georgia's contingents, 37 athletes and coaches represented the greatest number in school history. And whereas if the University of Georgia were a country, the 10 medals they won would rank them 27th among 207 nations that competed in the Rio Games. And whereas the students, alumni, and staff of the University of Georgia who took part in the Olympics and Paralympics Games serve as goodwill ambassadors for the university, the Athens-Clarke County community, and their respective countries. And whereas the mayor and commission of the Unified Government of Clarke County wish to express their appreciation to the resident students, alumni, and staff of the University of Georgia who so honorably represented their university and community in the 2016 Olympics and Paralympic Games in Rio, and called Athens-Clarke County home during their time here. Now, Nancy Denson, Mayor of the Unified Government of Athens-Clarke County, does hereby proclaim September 6, 2016 as Athens-Clarke County Olympian and Paralympic Day, and encourages its citizens to express their appreciation to these athletes and coaches for their competitive spirit and proud representation of their university and community, in witness whereof Nancy has set her hand and caused the seal of Athens-Clarke County to be affixed this 6th day of September 2016. Signed, Nancy B. Denson, Mayor of the Unified Government of Athens-Clarke County. And each one of you will be getting one of these from around that. And she has one of these for each one of you. And you see, we dogs. Hey, hey. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Coach.
The mayor missed out on the good part. Now, before we start, there's one other thing that I would like to do. We've been a little remiss about that. And Mr. Jestin Johnson is going to come up and introduce him. This is our assistant manager that he spoke to us over at 120 Dartry. But citizens of Athens-Clarke County, this is part of the management team that makes Athens-Clarke County run.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the commission. My name is Jestin Johnson, the newest member of the management team here for the Unified Government. Certainly wanted to take this opportunity to introduce myself and just let you all know how excited and appreciative I am for this opportunity. For those in the audience, you know, I'm the random person sitting behind Mr. Williams. But I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. Most recently, I was the city manager of Bisbee, Arizona, and prior to that, I was the deputy city administrator for the city of McDonough, Georgia, just south of Atlanta. Born and raised in Georgia, and very excited and happy to be back home. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Rattlin, if you would call the roll.
Dickerson. Here. Link. Here. Wright. Here. Bailey. Here. Neesmith.
Here.
Bale. Here. Harrod.
Present.
Gertz.
Here.
Hamby.
Here.
At this time, I'd entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes for the meetings of August 2nd, August 16th, December 15th, 2015, and Tuesday, January 19th, 2016.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved in second that the minutes of those dates that we named would be approved. Is there none in readiness? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Is there any written communication, Ms. Brown? At this time, this is the first of the 4 times that we have public input. We have 3 items on the consent agenda. Let me ask if there's a commissioner that would like to remove one of those before we start. Seeing no one, is there anyone in the public arena that would like to speak to items 1, 2, and 3? Seeing no one, I will entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved by Ms. Dickerson, seconded by Mr. Hamby. All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. At this time, we will be looking at items 4 through 9. If there's anyone that would like to come to the podium to speak to any of these items at this time, please do so. Please state your name and please follow the light that will be running for 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Nat Kirkendall. I live at 108 River Bottom Circle here in Athens, and I'm here as Vice Chair of the Oconee Rivers Greenway Commission, and just would like to address items 5, 6, and 9. And item 5 is, of course, important to our commission in that we've been looking forward to the construction of these sections of the Greenway for quite some time, so we're very excited that that's moving forward and encourage its approval. Similarly, on the Rails to Trails program, although this is not per se part of the Rivers Greenway, that we still think this is a very important link in the network of public trails here in the county, and so we also encourage that. And finally, item 9, the applicants for our commission. We interviewed 5 very capable people, any of which would have been an asset to our commission. But the 2 that have been selected here, we think have the best connection to our areas of interest. And those are Jake Mass and Derek Little. And so we hope that you'll accept those new commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Items 4 through 9.
My name is Ann Clendon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. I have concerns about the green belt coming through Oconee Hills Cemetery for personal reasons. My daughter's buried there, and my husband and I will be buried beside her. There are plenty of roads for family, friends, and visitors to enjoy the beauty and the serenity of the cemetery. But I have some concerns about a 12-foot concrete fenced on one side path with signage coming through the cemetery. Bad things happen to cemeteries even with the safeguards in place. Vandalism. A wind chime was stolen from my daughter's grave this year. I just have concerns about people coming in that might not have the monitoring during the regular hours of a cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else?
Hi, my name is Tony Deutsch, and I live at 278 Mosside Drive. And 7 years ago, we purchased our family burial plots at Oconee Hills Cemetery because of what it was. Had we known then that this was a contemplated project, we wouldn't have purchased the plots. And I was wondering whether or not the city commissioners would be willing to buy the plots back for those of us who didn't have any idea this was going to take place. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Elliot Cole, 470 Pineal Road. Coming up to support numbers 5 and 6. Primarily, when I get up here and talk, it's I don't want to say it's always to be critical, but usually it's with a critical eye. But I'm really coming here to support these two proposals, mainly because we need transportation options in this county, and these trails provide both recreation and transportation options. The mayor and commission, other elected officials, staff, the county manager's office have worked really hard on both the SPLOST office as well. Can't forget them. I've worked really, really hard on, making these plans available to folks and making them, putting a lot of money towards them. So I say we support them, and I want to see, really looking forward to seeing these paths develop as not just, again, recreation, but as transportation for folks that need transportation every day, walking and biking. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no one else coming behind, we will now come behind the rail. Item number 4 is the public art recommendation for SPLOST project number 8, Rails to Trails. This is with the art, I believe. Ms. Link?
Yeah, I propose a commission-defined option for this. I sat on the Cultural Affairs Commission in its earliest years. And during those earliest years, we did a lot of boring stuff like coming up with a mission statement and bylaws. But we did a lot of dreaming about what some of the future projects that we might be able to put some art on might be. And we talked a lot about the Greenway and the rail trail and had slideshows, and the possibilities were endless. And seeing this proposal for, what would essentially simply be a sculpture plopped down on the side of the trail doesn't really consider the vastness of those possibilities. We talked a lot about gateways and wayfinding, benches and bike racks and the kind of functional art pieces that can have a real impact on the use and the history of that rail trail, which has a lot of history. I also have concerns with, the $60,000 is a fairly decent chunk of change for this kind of project, and it kind of limits the number of local artists who might be able to apply for this kind of project. I hope that the commission would consider spreading that out a little bit, not just spreading it out along the trail, but spreading it out among artists. I've had several conversations with Rail Trail members and also Cultural Affairs Commission members. This siting was decided upon when the decision was made to combine the Greenway and the rail trail budgets. And that decision has since been turned around, and the rail trail is now its own budget, its own art budget. And while that might have been an appropriate location for a piece of art at that, when the two budgets were combined, now that they're no longer combined, I feel like we really need an artwork that is specific to the rail trail project and specifically honors the historical aspects and the functionality of that trail. So I'm proposing that we go ahead and vote yes, that this is definitely a appropriate project for that budget and that $60,000 budget. So yes on A and C, but no on the siting and no on going forward with executing the documents, no on B and D. And that we add a directive that the Cultural Affairs Commission reconvene together with members of the user group for this project, project number 8, sub-project 1, and also bring in members of the Rail Trail Committee as well as Firefly Inc. to develop a new proposal for location or locations and concept or concepts associated specifically with this sub-project to be approved at a later date by this body. I will move that we adopt that commission-defined option.
Madam.
I feel like we've worked for a long time getting the community people involved with the arts.
I second.
Okay, it's been second. Okay, we have a second that one.
Commissioner.
Because it was going to die
Link's.
without a lack of a
Yes.
second, but since we have a second, okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I have been very concerned about the discussion of taking this away from the group that was assigned through our Cultural Foundation. I know some of them personally that have worked on the different ideas of projects. We try in our community, the commissioners do, the government does, to get people more involved, to give of themselves, to help with different decisions. And I feel like this is a way of taking it away from them, what we've asked them to do. And I know it's already in process, and I think it's unfair that we would pull this back from them to be able to accomplish what they had intended.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Neesmith?
I've been thinking hard about this and long, and talked to some folks, present and current members of the Arts Commission, and I have two concerns. One is that us trying to mix wayfinding and benches and so forth with art seems to me to dilute what art is. I don't think that's appropriate. I think we need to have the appropriate budget in the project for those kinds of things, which are fundamental to the project itself, not to art. We've already had the Rails to Trails, Oconee Rivers Network folks, and the ACAC working on this, and what we have before us is their recommendation. So I'm with Diane. I think we should go forward with their recommendation, and if we need further wayfinding and benches and so forth, then we need to work that out in the budget of the project itself.
Mr. Harrod, and then Manager Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I would agree with my colleagues, Commissioner Neesmith and Bell, but I'd like to ask the manager a couple of questions.
He's ready.
Mind. So, could you tell us a little bit about the process whereby this recommendation came about?
Yes, well, the Athens Cultural Affairs Commission, I think, met with the user group and the Rails to Trails Committee and some other folks in developing these recommendations. And as your agenda item spells out, there were other decision points, whether or not to combine this with the Greenways. And so there was some deliberation undertaken there. So I want to answer your question. I also want to offer this point to Commissioner Neesmith. There is some funds within the construction budget for some basic wayfinding signage. It's just there's no funds for interpretive signage at this point.
But we could add that later if we so choose.
Certainly.
We just have to appropriate some funding to do so.
You could augment that.
So having an art piece, and I agree with what Commissioner Neesmith says, having an art piece does not preclude having other kinds of wayfinding or other benches or whatever you want to do at various points along the trail from downtown all the way out to Winterville if we so choose. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Gertz?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I appreciate it. I agree that the wayfinding and interpretive signage should just be kind of a pro forma part of a trail of this sort, separate from the art budget. I mean, certainly, there are times when you see some dovetailing between functional aspects of a project and sort of creative or artistic aspects of a project. And I think there are probably any number of opportunities to see that kind of working in concert of both those notions. However, as I expressed, I believe, at the agenda-setting meeting, I'm concerned that what we're looking at here is a single point of spending $60,000 on art. Again, a pretty significant sum. We're looking at art pieces. I'd be much more interested in cracking this open again and taking another look to see if there could be a sequence of pieces, and particularly if we could shine a light on the trailhead where the trail intersects with East Broad Street, where there would be many more viewers just on a daily basis, and that might serve as an entrance and invitation to the trail. So, there's nothing about the wayfinding or interpretive signage embedded in the commission-defined option that's sort of been in discussion, but, insofar as the text asks for a second look at this, I would support that second look.
Mr. Bailey?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I was just going to make the point that functional, there's such thing as functional art, too. A good example would be the bus stops that we have in the community. They came up with some pretty interesting designs, and they're still functional, and I think they add to the atmosphere and quality of life in our town. So, although as Commissioner Gertz said, the proposal the CDO from Commissioner Link isn't that specific about whether signs need to be functional or they need to be artistic or benches or whatever, but it is possible to have functional art that fits into a space.
Mr. Hamby.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Certainly, I'm just wondering, is it our job to figure out what the art is going to be, or is it the Cultural Affairs Commission's job to find out what the art is going to be? And it's my understanding it's the Cultural Affairs Commission. And from what I see in their letter that they wrote to us, and again, I'm hoping to encourage everybody to look, 10 or 20 years down the road when hopefully we're creating art that will still be around for people to enjoy and see at that point in time, that this location, which was extensively looked at by a user group, by the members of the Cultural Affairs Commission, by members of the Rail to Trail, and by members of our SPLOST, that this area is going to be visible. It's going to be a central location as we develop Dudley Park even more so. I understand there's always been an amphitheater component part of Dudley Park, so that'll certainly get people down there to see this. And it's going to be a good gathering space that's very close to downtown. So who's to say 5 or 10 years down the road that this isn't going to be a really good place for some visible art? It's a good place now for some visible art. And we don't know if it's going to be one piece or several pieces around this location. That's up to the Cultural Affairs Commission to decide. Some of you may know I've been dabbling at art a little bit myself, and I hope somebody pays me $60,000 one day for some art. That would be nice. So at any rate, I'm comfortable with the Cultural Affairs Commission recommendation. I hope we'll support it. I think they do some good work. They have a really good track history of doing some good work and making some good recommendations for this body and for this community. Thank you.
Ms. Wright?
I'm glad that we have this discussion about what to do and how to spend money that's been designated for art, because it's clearly a priority that the community has made. And I have been trying to balance out the large one project in Dudley Park versus what I could envision being several versions of a smaller art that would tie this together, because this project is different than the other SPLOST. It's a linear, it's got miles to it, there's length to it, it's a whole different process. And I think that our Athens Cultural Affairs Commission is dealing with a new element and lots of groups, and they have grown, like Commissioner Link said when she was on it. It was a totally different commission as to the complexity of what they're dealing with now. And so with their advice and the work that they've come forward, I'm supportive of the what's in the packet and not the commission-defined option. But I did want to lend some thought out there, since they're listening, is that we are about to have more linear projects. This next project that we're talking about on the Greenway has a $55,000 public art budget. So when the guidelines are set up for the committee that's set up to pick the artist and pick the project that gets the art, I hope that there's some leeway for that artist to potentially have a larger or linear palette. I'm not real big about the big bulldog statues, and that's at the head of this trailhead, but there could be another look that could be extended on it. But for the location and for the height of the bridge that's coming across the river, we need a piece of art that has scale and magnitude of that, for that location, for it to be an impact and seen and appreciated, and draw people in and out of that. So I won't be supporting the commission-defined option.
Mr. Hamby?
And just to piggyback on what Commissioner Wright was saying, you're exactly right. But in thinking about it, so we have this set aside for this project. But who's to say down the line that some other? I would hope, and I would expect that the Cultural Affairs Commission will also be encouraging other pieces of artwork along the rail to trail network. I don't see this as the last piece of art along this linear trail as you're describing there.
Mr. Neesmith.
There's another point to be made. This $60,000 doesn't buy a piece of art. It buys the art and also covers the cost of installing it. So the costs involved, not just producing the art, are very significant. And if we spread that out to multiple pieces of art, we get less art. We get more installation expenses. So I agree. We need a high-impact piece of art at that location. It will serve us well for our future.
Okay, no, Ms. Link and then Mr. Gertz.
I have a couple questions for management. According to the agenda report, this location was selected as a compromise location for the Greenway and the rail trail. So there was going to be a single piece of art using both Greenway and rail trail funding, and this was deemed to be the place where those two trails intersect, and a large piece of art that could impact both those trails could be most visible. Correct?
That was the initial thinking, yes.
Okay, so this location was specifically chosen as kind of an intersection of the two trails and the ideal location for the intersection of the two trails. And now that that budget has been separated, it makes sense to go back and say, wait a second, maybe if we're only looking at the rail trail, there might be a more impactful location, like perhaps the trailhead. And note that this commission-defined option does not specify any kind of art. That should be totally up to the Cultural Affairs Commission. And I want to also point out that this asked for input from the Rail Trail Committee and Firefly Inc. From what I understand, they were not consulted in this site selection process. Is that correct, Andy? Could you answer?
The user group from the Rails to Trails walked the site. They are the group of the Rails to Trails Committee that are authorized to make decisions like this.
And what is the makeup of that group? Is it not mostly staff members?
I believe it's 3 staff members and 2 members of the committee. But
So the decision was guided by staff more than
well, you don't
citizens.
know who voted how, so you can't make that statement.
I'd just like to see more citizens be able to weigh in on these decisions rather than decisions being guided by staff.
Mr. Williams and then Mr. Kurtz.
Well, I do want to qualify, the two budgets were never combined, number one. And secondly, and as your agenda report reads, there were reasons why they recommended separate public art projects, probably for the same reasons that you're speaking of, Commissioner Link. But they, in the end, they recommend this site because it is the intersection. If you think about it, from what you're going to vote on here shortly, sort of a north-south going towards Botanical Gardens, going up to Sandy Creek Nature Center, and east-west going from downtown, ultimately to Winterville, perhaps. And so I think that was a major decision that the board, which is entirely made up of citizens, voted to recommend to you.
Mr. Gertz?
Just kind of tying together a couple of pieces of thought that we've had tonight. I mean, I think why there's diversity of opinion around this generally is sort of to Commissioner Wright's point that this is a linear feature. I mean, it's not like a single building where there's a one designated entryway. And so there are going to be lots of points of ingress and egress. There are going to be a lot of places where this intersects with neighborhoods and with existing streets and where people come across it from different vantage points. And so I think everybody's intent is to try and sort of think in that global sense. And I certainly agree with Mike that, you know, my hope would be that there would be some other places for art. You know, what I'd like to see happen, and you know, I certainly can say this informally, but you know, I'd like to see some follow-up on this, is to have, you know, those bodies who've got interest in this, the Cultural Affairs Commission, the Firefly body, the Rail Trail Group, you know, have some conversation about where some ideal vantage points for other art pieces would be. If we're going to select a single art piece, and you know, we can all count votes, you know, let's at least begin to wrap our heads around trying to think of a sequence of opportunities. I mean, you know, you think about say a linear opportunity like the Atlanta airport, where there's a series of walkways and passenger trams, and there are a lot of pieces of art throughout that airport. I kind of think about this in the same way.
The motion on the floor, Mr. Neesmith.
I'd like to make a substitute motion.
Substitute motion, please, sir.
For option 1, A, B, C, and D.
I'll second that.
It has been moved and seconded, the substitute motion, Mr. Harrod, that we, the options that are presented in the packet would be, let me get to those right quick. All right. and those are to declare that SPLOST 2011 Project 8 Rails to Trail Network Program Sub-Project Number 1 is appropriate for public art. B, approve the Dudley Park site recommended by the Athens Cultural Affairs Commission for installation of public art as part of SPLOST 2011 Project 8 Sub-Project Number 1 as depicted in attachment number 1. Approve budget of $60,000 for the construction and installation of the public art for SPLOST Project 8 Sub-Project 1, and authorize the mayor for appropriate staff to execute all necessary documents. That is the motion that we will be voting on. Roll call, Mrs. Spratlin. Mr. Neesmith.
Neesmith?
Yes.
Hamby?
Yes.
Bale?
Yes.
Harrod?
Yes.
Dickerson? Yes. Sims? I'm sorry. Gertz?
No.
Link?
No.
Wright?
Yes.
Bailey?
No.
3 no, 6 yes.
Motion passes. And just as an aside, this project is in District 2. So I didn't say anything to make sure I wouldn't prejudice anybody. Item number 5 is the Oconee Greenways Network Connector, SPLOST 211, project number 9, sub-project numbers 2, 3, 4, preliminary plans. Mr. Neesmith.
I think this has been talked about in a great deal, and I think that we see the good and the bad, but we see mostly good. So I'm going to move that we approve. Hang on a second here. Sorry.
I don't understand.
Option 1, A, B, C, and D.
I'll second.
It's been seconded by Mrs. Wright. Mr. Hamby.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I do have a few questions for Manager Williams, and it's regarding, of course, the cemetery. And I guess I'm wondering, are we putting the cart before the horse if we need to make sure that the trustees and the folks that the trustees serve are getting to a comfort level about this project? I mean, I do see some value, some significant value in having the cemetery and the Greenway as a partnership, so to speak. And I guess I'm wondering about that, and whether or not we need more time to see if that works itself out.
Well, what y'all are being asked to do is approve preliminary plans and allow staff to go ahead and acquire all necessary rights of way and easements. And that's really the next domino to fall here. The Board of Trustees is weighing its options. It has some things that it wants to address, and we can't have the property or easements appraised and given to them until we get past this stage. In no way will this project go forward without the Board of Trustees' approval. And so there is time, but they need a little more information in order to make an informed decision. And it is our hope that they would be able to communicate with folks that have interest in the cemetery to convey what the decision points are.
So what I'm hearing you say is certainly if you're not a member of the trustees, there is some opportunity for people who are in this, or not in the cemetery, but have family members in the cemetery to weigh in with those trustees about what they would like to see in order to feel comfortable before the Greenway to come through there.
Yes, and I think we need to help them with some images that they can share with folks, because what I'm seeing anecdotally, the Greenway is really not coming right through the middle of the cemetery. It is off to the side by the river, and in some cases shielded by a buffer of woods. It's on the old sewer easement. And so when folks see that, it's not quite as intrusive as.
So there's really no grave sites around that area.
There's one small area where the buffer gets fairly thin, but it's not very long at all.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Neesmith.
Yeah, I wish I had said something about that before I made the motion, because that's absolutely true. We're not going to do anything the trustees won't let us do. and we'll only do what the trustees let us do. And I encourage those who have concerns about it to work with the trustees because it's under their control. This lets us take the next step where we can begin to negotiate a little more seriously with the trustees. But if the trustees don't want to do this, then we're not going to be able to do it. We'll have to come back and find another way.
Ms. Bell?
The people that reached out to me early in regard to the meeting that we had last week at the Sexton House, those people came back to me after they attended that meeting and asked for explanation and clarification and were very relieved. And I won't say exactly the word pleased, but they thought it would not be as negative as they had it built up in their own minds. So I would like to see us give more attention to explanation, and that's what I did. I walked to the areas so that they showed me what it is, and some of the families that had properties there did the same thing. So I wished we'd done it sooner.
Ms. Wright? Ms. Lee?
Yeah, this is in my district, and I've been following it before I was even a commissioner, and the details for this, and that does not substitute for the people who are just now learning about this and have concerns about it. I was at the meeting Tuesday for the whole time and learned a lot because it was people who didn't have the same background that I had, the same reading materials I had, the same images over and over as I've had. And I just want to say that we're listening and that there are ways that we can address these concerns. If it's when the gates are open or when the gates are closed to match the cemetery, then let's look at what it takes to do that. Some of the easy questions to answer were, I can't believe you're going to take trees down to put a path through. And it was easy to say, well, there's already a path. It's already an easement that the sewer line's on. That was an easy question to answer. We've got more challenging questions and concerns to address, and I want to make sure that everyone understands that we're going to address that. I talked to a woman on the phone today. She said, I just don't want it to be recreation going through the cemetery. I said, well, how do you feel when people are walking through it now and running through it now? And, there is a little bit of that, but it's the volume change that they perceive would happen. And there are people who will not want to go on the Greenway if they know it goes through a cemetery. So we've got to say outside of this point, as well as for those to learn what it means to be respectful in a cemetery, not just to say that, but to spell out what that means. It also might mean that if you're going to leave the Greenway path and maybe take your children to teach them things and explore the history of the cemetery, that we might say no wheeled vehicles through the cemetery. Maybe we have it to where they park those out of sight, and then they could walk through and be more of the pedestrian traffic. Whatever concerns are there, we need to hear them, and I want to learn what it takes to address it, and that's where we're going to have the partnership with the trustees and the people who are just now learning about it to tell me and us what the concerns are so that we can have some problem solving for that. But to get to that point, we have to move forward tonight to get the details and the authority for the discussion on those details.
Thank you. Ms. Dickerson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I agree with Commissioner Wright about this. I think it's we all acknowledge this is an emotional aspect to this because we've got people who are mourning loved ones who want to go and spend time at their grave sites and whatnot, and I don't think anybody behind the rail anyway feels any differently than that. I think it's important to understand that our staff has been very respectful through this whole process. I met with some of them last week to try to gain a better understanding because I came into this later than at least 7 or 8 of y'all, 7 of y'all behind the rail. So, and I think they've worked really hard to address the concerns of the trustees. I do think it's important. It does seem like there is somewhat of a disconnect, and maybe because of the reasons Manager Williams mentioned, that there is somewhat of a disconnect between the people who own plots or maybe go visit grave sites there and the trustees. And I greatly encourage them to start having those conversations. Miss Clenenden, who got up to speak, is one of my neighbors, and a very sad situation to have to bury a child. So I certainly understand where she's coming from. I do want to reiterate, though, that the Greenway does run alongside the cemetery. It doesn't run through the cemetery. There is a point at which it does essentially cross through the cemetery. But the website that Oconee Hills has up right now encourages visitors and bicyclists. And part of that is because the trustees understand they have to keep up the perpetual care of that cemetery. And also, it's a historic site. I mean, there's governors and other very important people that are buried there, along with just relatives of people who live in our community. So, one way to look at it, I guess there's two schools of thought. The more people you have, the more potential for vandalism, but the more people you have, the more eyes you have on the trail as well. So I guess it depends on which side of that argument you fall on. But again, I think, as Commissioner Wright said, it's important that we move ahead in order to have those conversations, in order for them to have those conversations with the plot owners and the users, that we move ahead with this recommendation tonight.
Mr. Link?
Yeah, I agree. We definitely need to move ahead on this. This is a plan that's been in the works for a long time. And I want to note, it is not recreational purely. I mean, the primary function of the Greenway is an important transportation corridor for the future sustainability of our community. And I fully sympathize with the concerns of those who have loved ones buried there and some of the intrusions that have been happening as of late. But I truly believe that we can address those concerns and that we can come up with, the right security to assure that those who are using this transportation corridor are using it to go through an area. And this doesn't go through the cemetery. It goes along the river adjacent to the cemetery, and like was pointed out, there's a pretty thick wooded buffer through most of this. So through most of this path, you wouldn't even know that you're in a cemetery. So I hope that we can have more conversations with the folks who have plots at the cemetery and meet their concerns about security and the actual functionality of the trail.
I will entertain a motion.
Yeah, there is a motion.
No. Did I get that? Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, Mr. Neesmith and Ms. Wright, that's right. Any other discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. Number 6, Rails to Trail Network, SPLOST Project 8, and SPLOST Project, and that's in that 05, that's 2011, Project 8, SPLOST 05, Project 29, and Sub-Project 1. Ms. Dickerson.
Question of the manager's office on page 90 of the PDF, item 18. Under history, it says the GOT completed its review. Do we know, is there any reason to assume that the GOT will not, since that's blank, will not approve the recommendation?
No. In fact, I think they have, and we did not update the agenda item.
Okay.
I believe it has been approved.
Okay. Ms. Wright.
Motion to approve A and B.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve. Any further discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 8, we had this by title only on the other day, and so it's, excuse me, number 7, I'm sorry, number 7, legislative, getting ahead of myself. Okay, legislative review, animal control ordinance. Mr. Gertz.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. As we mentioned at agenda setting, this was sort of a process informational notice just to kind of let the full commission know what the conversation looked like when this topic initially visited legislative review. Clearly, based on the conversation, we need to go back to the garage and get under the hood and do some more work. And so I'd like to make a motion that we return this item to legislative review for additional review.
Second.
It's been moved to second that we pass this out with no action. All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Okay. Now, number 8, towing of vehicles on public property. Ms. Attorney, you have an ordinance for that, sir.
Order with respect to towing of vehicles from public property and for other purposes.
Discussion, motion? Don't want it to die.
I move to approve.
Ms. Dickerson made a motion, move to approve.
I'll second that. I'm
Seconded
sorry.
by Mr. Harris.
Paying attention.
Mr. Hamby, sorry. I want to mix them two up.
How could you possibly do that?
Any other, Ms. Wright?
Yeah, I have a question, and I'll just have to admit, since we didn't have this several weeks ago to read, I wasn't going to get to read through the whole thing, and I just wanted to know, is this sort of just, can you address the motivation for this, or are we just tidying up some areas in our ordinances for this topic?
There are a couple of motivations. The first one is that the parking agreement with the ADDA did not include the authority for the ADDA to tow vehicles from the lots that they police for the unified government. And that's become necessary with changes downtown. A lot of residential folks want to park in our lots. So that was one of the main motivations. The other is just to clarify how the immobilization and towing is done, particularly with the immobilization or booting. It's to give a prior notice to people who've not paid their tickets. They're going to get a notice in the mail ahead of time, pre-booting, and we think that'll bring in more response first, but it'll also satisfy due process in a better way.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hamby?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And I appreciate the attorney Berryman working on this, and certainly I know the ADDA and our parking director who the tools he carries around are a boot and a tow. So he greatly appreciates this as well. But he should, because what we've done and what ADDA done and what this parking director have done has really helped our parking situation downtown, which also helps the merchants, and it also helps the community at large. I do have a question though about the letters that go out. So certainly it's always been a thing in the past when somebody does get a ticket from one of our ADDA enforcement parking officials. How do they finding the address for some of these folks who may be out of town or something like that and may come back to town? How, or as transient as our community is, is there? I know we've been working with our tax commissioner's office to find those addresses. Is that something we'll continue, or is it something that perhaps we could also work with our police department on, or how is that going to unfold so that we are able to get the notification letters out to the right addresses?
We are working, the tax commissioner can continue to do that, to run those tag numbers to get the address of the owner. There's also a program through the Department of Motor Vehicles for ADDA to make direct communication to the Department of Motor Vehicles to get that information.
Yeah, and I think we've looked into that before, and it really was kind of expensive from what I remember. So, but anyway, I think it'll work. I think it'll work out, and if we find any issues that we need to, we'll come back and address those. But thank you for putting this together.
Okay. Mr. Harry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I have one quick question, and it just came to me in the meeting, and I hate to put you on the spot a little bit, but I'm looking at this, and it says that in Chapter 3.3, Section 3.3.3, parking prohibited, and it looks like there's some language added to the code talking about on any facility or property owned or leased by Athens-Clarke County. Is that talking about private property that Athens-Clarke County might lease, or is it talking about Athens-Clarke County property that we may lease to somebody else?
We put leased in there because we do have some bond arrangements, particularly with the deck downtown, where the unified government is the leasehold. It's not like a transient sort of lease. So we put that in there. I'm not familiar with other properties that the county is actually the tenant of a private owner for parking. This would only be for either long-term ground lease type arrangements or actual ownership of the lot by the government.
And so if we had a piece of property, I like to kind of think down the road about consequences of actions that we may or may not take. If we had a piece of property that we rented, say, to the University of Georgia, which is a state entity, and I know that sometimes they're subject to local ordinances and sometimes they're not, what would happen in that situation?
I would think if we had a lease with UGA, that would be one of the prime areas of negotiation. And we actually do have a shared parking management arrangement down near Chicopee, very similar to that. And there's a very complex, or not complex, but comprehensive agreement between them about who enforces the parking when. So those would just be in the lease agreement.
Okay, so that's not something that you think is a problem, a
No,
potential
I don't
problem?
think so.
Okay, thank you.
And keep in mind, this is just for the downtown district, the downtown boundary district, as far as ADDA operating that.
But we
Yeah.
did include areas like parks and transportation and public works.
That the police would deal with.
That the police would deal with, that's correct.
Bill, if I'm correct, only the manager has the ability to designate those folks who are authorized to tow, other than the police chief and the authority, which is specifically spelled out.
That's correct. That's correct.
It's not inherent in the lease. Yeah.
Right.
Further discussion? We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. I'll entertain a motion for suspension of rules.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and second, Mr. Harrington, and seconded by Mr. Gertz for suspension of rules. All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Okay, this is appointments to the Greenway, and Ms. Bratlin, I don't have them. I did hear names, but I didn't. Oh, 124, I'm sorry. Hold on, okay, my PDF. Okay. Usually we have this on paper. And those names are, Mr. Jake Moss and Derek M. Little. I'll entertain
It's
a
also
motion.
Ned Kirkendall, sir.
Reappointment.
On the very top.
The reappointment of Mr. Kuykendall. Okay. Mr. Naismith?
I think the Greenway Commission has done an excellent job in screening and interviewing, and these people are very qualified, so I'd like to make a motion to accept these nominations as appointments to the Greenway Commission.
I'll second that.
It has been moved and second that Mr. Kuykendall be reappointed to a term expiring 12/31/2020. Mr. Jake Moss, a partial term expiring 12/31/2017, and a partial term for Mr. Little, partial term expiring 12/31/2020. All those in favor, sign of aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion is carried. At this time, we will now prepare for our zoning items. Mr. Griffith is coming forward.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, would you
Yes, sir.
mind if I interrupt just real quick? For this next item, the request of,
You're going to get the third one, but the one after that one. But you may.
yes, sir, I sure do. Okay, you're right. I'm sorry.
I'm on it.
You're in charge tonight. I should listen to you.
Yeah. What can I say? What can I say?
You should listen to everyone.
I'm trying to.
At this time, we have, this is our third opportunity for public input. The items are of zoning. Each one of them are taken on an individual basis. We have 3 zoning items that we'll be looking at tonight. The first one is item number 10, request of James C. Warren for TC Village Shops LLC for rezoning from CR Commercial Rural to CG Commercial General on 2.498 acres known as 796 U.S. Highway 29 North. The purpose is for commercial. Remember the 3-minute
Yes, sir.
light, please.
About 30 seconds.
30 seconds will work.
My name is Jim Warnes, and my address is 244 East Washington Street. There was a large parcel just north of the Kroger Shopping Center up on U.S. Highway 29, north of First Madison Bank, that was all zoned commercial rural. This is the last piece that has been proposed to go from commercial rural to commercial general. It is literally the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle to be put into place, and I would ask that you make that placement. Thank you, sir.
Any other comments? We'll come behind the rail. This is in District 9. Mr. Gertz?
It is. It's the outer band of District 9. We'll get to the inner core in just a minute. As Mr. Warren's mentioned, this is fully surrounded by commercial general property, the Trail Creek development, as well as the property that was just recently rezoned. And so I'd like to make a motion for approval.
Second.
It's been moved and second that will approve. There's an ordinance, Mr. Attorney.
An ordinance to amend the Code of Athens-Clarke County, Georgia, with respect to rezoning the parcel of land at 796 U.S. Highway 29 North from CR Commercial Rural to CG Commercial General and for other purposes.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, sign of aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. At this time, item number 11, Mr. Warren has a 10-minute request on this particular item, and Commissioner Hamby will recuse himself from this particular item in the discussion phases and the voting phase.
And I just should explain that I have a working relationship with the school, who has a very strong relationship with the Archdiocese. So.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Again, I'm Jim Warrens, 244 East Washington Street. While I requested 10 minutes, I don't think I'll take all of it, but I felt like I might run over the 3 minutes. This is the Prince Avenue project, St. Joseph's project. I think everyone is aware of it. We have been here before. We asked for it to go back to the Planning Commission so that some logistical items could be worked out, and you were gracious enough to grant that. Not to belabor the point, but Mr. Davis and his staff, Urban Homes, have been very sensitive to ACC design requirements. They had numerous meetings with the neighborhood. They listened to the input. They listened to the Planning Commission initial report, because this comes through as a PD. They went back and made numerous changes in response to those reports. During the time that this was back at the Planning Commission, since the last time we were here, they were able to get their internal things worked out, and so therefore it came back with no changes from what was initially proposed. And the planning staff has recommended that it be adopted with those same initial plans. However, in the meantime, there has been some conversation with the community, particularly the folks that live on Child Street. And I'd like to take a second just to address some of those. As a result of some of the concerns, Commissioner Gertz has put forth a commission option. One of the points of that is that some of the planting specifications were redone, and his commission designated option is make sure that those are in the plan as a part of the plan. And obviously, since he worked with Mr. Smith, who is the architectural consultant, the landscape architectural consultant, obviously we have no problem with that, because that was again a combined effort. This thing has been community collaborated all the way through. The next request was, as a condition for approval, that the left turn only sign be placed at the driveway that will exit out onto Child Street. Now, Mr. Davis and his folks are willing to do this. I mean, there's a minimal expense, and he doesn't have any problem doing this. The only thing that we question is that what that means is that people that live down Child Street, live back on the Barrow Street area, back in that area, they will not be able to come and be at these shops and use the grocery store and so on, and go out on Child Street and turn right to go home, which is the shortest route. It's going to force them to go around the block. But if that's what they want, we certainly don't have any objection to it. There had been a request. Mr. Davis met most recently with the neighborhood again, and there was a request that there be a no left turn into that thing. That kind of situation would be coming no left turn off the street. We don't have any control over what goes on Child Street, so we can't make that a part of our request. And again, the same thing is those people that are in the neighborhood that want to come shop there. certainly they would want to be able to turn left and to come in the short distance. The next to last point is a request that the developer provide a comprehensive, long-term, 20-year minimum complete streets analysis prepared by a qualified professional to include intersectional analysis, segment analysis, pedestrian analysis for the Prince Avenue corridor from Pulaski Street to Barber Street prior to the issuance of any development permits. Purpose of such analysis is to evaluate multimodal impacts generated by the proposed development. Again, I talked to Mr. Davis about this. He has no objection to providing that study. From what I understand in talking to planning is a lot of the work has been done. Whoever this independent qualified professional would be, surely he would have access to those things that have already been done. He doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. He could simply synthesize all of this and make his report. The one aspect of this from the very beginning is that one of the concerns that sort of run adjacent to this project is the ability to cross Prince Avenue safely. And this has been a matter of discussion in this community and in this commission for a number of years. The applicant has said that he will pay for a stoplight and don't walk signs where the driveway of this development comes into Prince Avenue next to the flagpole. He still is willing to do that. Now again, we cannot make the installation of that traffic light a condition of the PD because that's something that takes place within the right-of-way of Prince Avenue. But I have to really emphasize this because part of the reason why we have garnered the support of Boulevard and Cobham and a number of folks up and down Pulaski Street, even though there's some of the opposition comes from Pulaski and Childs, but the vast majority of support has been based on the affirmation that we would fund this if it would be approved by this commission. Now, it's not on the agenda tonight. It'll have to come back at some other time. But everybody needs to understand that that is really an integral part of this project because it satisfies a need of this community to have a way for folks to get from one side of Prince Avenue to the other side of Prince Avenue without taking their life in their hands. The last point is that on the front of the project, while it was redesigned in the interim so that it doesn't have the big wall that was in the initial design, there still will be a portion of a retaining wall, again, next to the entrance on Prince Avenue, and the grocery store will sit up above that. And so a request was made that there be some sort of art on that wall, that it not just be a blank wall. And again, they are willing to consult with the Cultural Affairs Commission to determine what appropriate art would be on there. And that's going to have to be one of those consultations where there's a lot of input from folks and talk about what fits with the project and so on. But having said all of that, we would ask for approval of this project using the commission-defined option.
Are there others from the audience that would like to speak?
My name is Clint McCrory. I live at 390 Franklin Street. I support the commission-defined option on this project. From a neighborhood viewpoint, what Commissioner Gertz is doing is addressing what happens on the boundary of the project, which is really important for any project of this scale. Having a more specific plan for a landscape buffer that goes beyond what's normally required, that is naming, every tree and shrub that would be there, is very commendable, and it's something that we should really always do when we have a planned development. The other part of the boundary that's being considered is the streetscape, Prince Avenue. And what's important here, as Mr. Warren's mentioned, is that we need to go beyond the usual traffic study that only considers automobile traffic and look at a multimodal viewpoint. That is, we need to take the needs of people who walk, people who ride bicycles, people who take public transportation into account to make sure that the impact of this rather large development is minimized. And in particular, there'll be a lot more pedestrians on the street when all these apartments are built. And so we have to really think about what that's going to do to Prince Avenue, the first block of Prince Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Hi, y'all. Tony Eubanks, 785 North Pope Street. I've been actively engaged in looking at Prince Avenue for close to 15 years, and I have been worried about what's going to go on at St. Joe's. We've seen it coming. It's like that train that you see way down the tracks. We've been worried about what's going to come down for St. Joe's. We've known it's been for sale for a long time. I understand that some people don't like this plan. I'm not one of those people. I think this is a good plan. But mainly, I want to commend Russ Davis for the job that he's done involving the community in the planning and reacting to the comments that he has gotten in the numerous, how many meetings do you think you had, Russ? Too many to count? I think that this is the way that we want developers to work in our community. I think he's done a really great job. Like I said, there's some people who are unhappy. I understand that. But I think it's a good plan. I think it's good for Athens. I think it's good for Prince Avenue, and I'm here to support Commissioner Gertz's commission-defined option. My understanding is from people I've talked to that they've hashed out most of the things that can be hashed out to the satisfaction of all parties. Brad, you said one time, nobody's happy, so we must have done a good job. I think when you got most people happy, you must have done a pretty good job. So anyway, I'm here to support this proposal, the commission-defined option from Mr. Gertz. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi, I'm Joe Arndt, 243 Barrow Street. I'm the one who's been clogging your inbox with the petition from the residents of Childs and Barrow Street. There's some late-breaking news on this, which I'll get to, but I'd just like to read the first part of the petition, which you've all received. It starts, County Commissioners, the process to rezone St. Joe's property has been going on for some time now. As is to be expected, a project of this scale in the center of a vibrant neighborhood has brought a wide variety of opinions, both for and against. The signers of this petition are no different. We are intentionally not expressing support or disapproval for this project. Rather, we ask you, our elected officials, if you are inclined to vote for this project, to only support proposals that will protect our neighborhood streets from an unnecessary influx of traffic. The background is, in essence, the St. Joe's property consists of two tracts of land that are diagonal to each other. One part is in the middle of Child Street, and the other is at the corner of Prince and Pulaski Street. Rather than developing the Childs tract as a standalone residential project and the Prince Pulaski tract as a dual commercial and residential project serviced by Prince Avenue, the current plan combines the two large tracts into one giant project with all parts being serviced by Prince Avenue and Child Street. While Prince Avenue is a busy, multi-lane commercial thoroughfare that can handle such an endeavor, Child Street is not. Child Street is a quiet, narrow, one-block neighborhood street which dead ends into Barrow Street, a similar two-block residential street. At times, Child Street is strained by one successful restaurant, Taqueria's Soul, which most of us, if not all of us, love. The speed limit is 20 miles an hour. The effect of just adding the 71 beds spread across 7 townhouses and 79 parking spots of the northwestern part of the project, which currently only has 17 residences, would no doubt be substantial. However, the impact would be nothing compared to the effect of giving the entire giant project, comprised of 178 beds, 300-plus parking spots, bearing in mind that the commercial ones would turn over several times a day, a grocery store, another commercial space, a restaurant, and a parking garage access to a street where two-way traffic often struggles when cars are parked on both sides of the street. There must be a better way. We are not trying to slow or scale down the project. We just ask that if you're so inclined to support it, only do so if at least one of the following changes are made, and we go on to list 3 options. Just the updates are, since I first emailed this petition, I've been encouraged by how many of you commissioners and the mayor have been willing to discuss our concerns and work towards a solution. At the end of last week, Commissioner Gertz added to his CDO a provision to prohibit the right-hand turns from the project onto Childs. And I want to thank Commissioner Gertz, as this is certainly a step in the right direction. However, this only addresses the exiting traffic, but leaves our streets vulnerable to all of the entering traffic. The update from this morning is we now have 19 signers instead of 17 signers, and Russ Davis, the developer, reached out to say he would support the Commissioner Gertz's CDO provision prohibiting the right turn exit onto Childs.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, time is up.
Okay.
Thank you. We do have petitions. Anyone else that would like to speak to this item? Seeing no one, we will come behind the rail. Mr. Gertz, I think Commissioner Fund option has been spoken about.
There is, and I just want to kind of make a couple of preliminary comments. In the long series of iterations of this project that have brought it before us today, I've just been thinking about what our life is like as a component of the land planning process. I was thinking about how my son's favorite evening activity lately has been putting puzzles together. But the puzzles that we buy for him come shrink wrapped, and there's an illustration on the top of the box that kind of fully details exactly what the whole image is going to be like that's going to be assembled by the 100 pieces within. Unfortunately for us, we don't get the shrink wrapped box with the full image. We get a few pieces at a time, and then months or years later, we get a few more pieces, and we have certainty about what some of those pieces are going to look like. We have some general idea about what some others might be, and in some other places, things are pretty foggy. And unfortunately, that's the nature of sort of a complex, interwoven system of parcels that we all have in our district. So I hope what's done with this commission-defined option is that we've nailed down those puzzle pieces that can be nailed down. But I at least want to make reference to a couple of others that are sort of hanging out there that are not directly tied to this project, but certainly where there's going to be some intermingling. You all know that we've got a number of options for neighbors who are interested in management of traffic in their neighborhoods. One is the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. I've made a second request. We did an analysis 2 years ago prior to the work that government operations did on reevaluating the criteria for inclusion in that program. And now that the thresholds are lowered, we're doing kind of another round of analysis. Pulaski Heights is a neighborhood that, if you go back 100 years, was certainly very active with both commercial and residential activity. It was just very different kinds of commercial activity and certainly different residential activity in that there were no vehicles at all on the street, except for those probably drawn by horses, and ones powered by steam going down the track. So flashing forward to 2016, and knowing that we've had Taqueria del Sol move in the last 5 years, the Leathers building become very vibrant in the last 10 years. Another development that's in the plans review process right now in Brad's shop that's coming to the corner of Pulaski and Barrow, as well as this project. There's sort of a separate request outside of this to look at that entire grid of the neighborhood. And so I just wanted to make mention of that, because I think a lot of the things that Mr. Arndt referenced are those kinds of things that have a series of hinges, and we need to think about all the hinges as we look at the neighborhoods. I just want to make my colleagues here aware that process is underway. Similarly, we have a process for neighborhood parking management. These streets in the grid that touch this project already are in the first phase and eligible for the neighborhood parking program, and currently neighbors are signing petitions to kind of take the next phase and spend their $10 a year on the hang tags. So that's another piece of the puzzle. One, again, that is not embedded in this agenda item, but I just want folks to be aware of, because we can't control everything in the context of this agenda item, but there certainly are some other items that we can do. Kind of focusing in on the commission-defined option, I think you heard Mr. Warren's mention, one component of this is a more detailed planting plan. One of the things that I worked with Bob Smith to do is ensure that there were some typical segments between this project territory and the adjacent neighbors that would just simply be more dense. So if you were standing at kind of one of the residential lots next to the property, you'd be less likely to see and hear the things that are happening on this property. Similarly, if you look at both the Child Street and the Pulaski Street frontage, the minimum caliper of the trees has been increased from 2 to 3 inches at the time of planting. And then, of course, there's the component of taking a left out only onto Child Street. And then finally, this analysis that I think is going to bear dividends in that we've seen this greatly enhanced pedestrian activity in the neighborhood already. And given that there's going to be a grocery store on this site, we're going to see much more pedestrian activity. And knowing that the pedestrian vehicular conflict has been a challenge, I want to make sure that everybody that visits this site, that walks past it, that lives on the site and walks from it, often probably to downtown and campus or the medical community, is going to have a safe walk.
Gertz, I'm going to ask that.
So I'm going to go ahead and stop right now.
Put you on the hold for that,
Right.
but you have another chance at another bite at the apple. Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I too would like to thank Mr. Davis for his willingness to work with the neighbors and with the community and our planners. And I agree with the comment that one of our citizens made that this is the way we'd like to see development happen in our community, where the people investing in this new project work hand in hand with the neighbors and the community. It's a win-win situation. And I appreciate what Mr. Gertz has done, Commissioner Gertz has done as well, and it is his district. Don't want to butt in too much, but I'm familiar with the issues there on Child Street. I regular patron at Taqueria del Sol, and it can be kind of hairy over there. It is a very small street, and I think what we're going to end up with is a very similar situation to what we have on Yonah Avenue. They're still working on that medical building there on Prince Avenue, but it's going to be dumping a lot of cars out onto Yonah Avenue to a very quiet street. And at the time, that particular developer wasn't interested in doing anything and didn't legally have to, and we didn't do anything to really help protect that neighborhood. We have an opportunity to do something here now, and we are doing a couple of things, and I do appreciate that, Commissioner Gertz, but I would like to see us also include the neighborhood's request to not allow left turns into the entrance and exit on Child Street. Commissioner Gertz has already put the no right turns out in there, but I would like to support what the neighbors are asking for, which is no left turns in. And I do also want to make a point to Mr. Warren's discussion. He was saying, well, this is going to cause a problem for the people on Child Street and Barrow Street pulling in and out too. But I think most of those folks are going to be walking. And that's part of the beauty of this project. It's going to have a great amount of walkability. And those folks are right there. And I don't think they're going to have problems pulling their cars in and out of the development. I think they're going to have a hard time pulling their cars in and out of their driveways. I think they'll be walking. But I would like to see us consider the neighborhood's other request as well. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Ms. Link?
I want to support Commissioner Gertz's option, but I want to go ahead and let him finish before I have anything to say.
Anyone else before I let Mr. Gertz speak his second term? Okay, Mr. Gertz. I think he was pretty close to
I'm essentially done.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Sure. I certainly would be happy to talk a little bit about the left turn prospect into the project, just in functional terms.
Go ahead.
If you want me to spend a minute on that. In practical terms, what you may often have is a Pulaski Street resident or a Barrow Street resident or an employee at the Leathers building who's sort of departing at the end of the day and would be able to pull in from Child Street, really no different than they would probably pass through the neighborhood on their way to any place. But this would allow them to park adjacent to the grocery store, pack up their groceries, and kind of move on to their next destination. Functionally speaking, we've got a couple of examples of the sort of no left turn in prohibitions in town, and they just don't work that well. You see just lots of sort of pulling over the curb and that kind of thing. The other component is that, should there be some kind of protected access at this entrance, whether that's for pedestrians or vehicles at some future point, those neighborhood residents would be able to take advantage of that. So, I don't see that turn in as nearly as challenging just in terms of functionality of the neighborhood as the prohibition on the right turnout.
Ms. Link.
Yeah. I also want to commend Mr. Davis and his crew for reaching out to the neighborhood and all those meetings, and really listening to what folks had to say. And this is the way it really should be done. We got lucky this time. We really did. We've seen a lot of development downtown that not a lot of people like, and it really feels good to see something that a lot of people do like. And I think that it's going to be a project that this community can really, really be proud of. And I want to thank Mr. Warrens for his plea for the traffic light. I know that is a really significant part of this project that could make or break it, as far as allowing the safest access to it for pedestrians as well as cars. So I really look forward to that traffic study. I know traffic studies, there are a lot of numbers. There are a lot of quantitative analysis, and they don't seem to always take into account the qualitative aspect of getting around, whether it's by car, by foot, by bike, by bus. So I hope that there is a lot of qualitative analysis in that study. I want to note that there are about, if I count correctly, I think there are 9 buses an hour that'll be going down this segment with bus stops on either side of the street. So people will be crossing the street at those bus stops or to get to those bus stops. And that can be really dangerous when you're crossing the street and you have to push a signal, and if it's a beg button, the signal doesn't necessarily show you that it's a walk sign, but you dash across. So that's something we need to consider too. People are going to be rushing to catch the bus. They see it down the street. So it's essential that we have that proper signaled crossing, with an actual stoplight where traffic is actually stopping. We've got to come to terms with the fact that downtown has grown, and this is downtown. For all accounts and purposes, this is downtown Athens, and we need to treat it like downtown Athens, where you do have your shorter blocks, and you do have your traffic signals at every corner. It's for the safety and for the sustainable growth of our community and for the economic success of this project and the other ones that are coming up around it, and there are more coming up. And I think we can learn a lot from this project, and I hope we can learn these lessons and we can incorporate them into the future projects.
Ms. Dickerson?
Yeah, I guess I have a question for the attorney. I had reached out to the attorney a couple weeks ago. Diane and I are both on a Georgia Initiative for Community Housing project, and we're, obviously always looking for ways to find a way to increase affordable and workforce housing. And so I reached out to the attorney and asked him if there's any way we could incorporate some form of inclusionary zoning or whatever in this development. And so I'm asking him to explain a little bit. But, I understand, and I apologize for not having spoken with him before this meeting again, since he sent me the information, but it's a good time to at least hash it out. My understanding was that housing is systemic, and so you can't really, I guess the laws don't apply in this case. But my question would be, isn't traffic considered systemic too? And we have other areas in the community that are just as bad safety-wise. So how could we compel a developer to do a complete streets analysis as part of a commission-defined option if it is?
Yes, and what the discussion we had was about the whether or not inclusionary zoning fits into the Georgia Development Impact Fee Law. And I believe that it would. I think it would be what's called an exaction if a government required a developer to set rents at a certain level. That's what inclusionary zoning is to make sure there are affordable rents there. And the difference between that, because that would be addressing a systemic problem, that is, affordable housing is a problem or an issue throughout the entire community that the government would be asking one entity to resolve. The study of the streets is related to the impact of this specific development on this very limited segment of the street that would be impacted by it.
Okay.
So it's the difference between a system improvement and a project improvement.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Neesmith.
I'm a little confused. It's not unusual, but I don't understand why we need for the developer to do a comprehensive, complete streets analysis. It's been done. In fact, we once funded a pedestrian traffic light right there. So why are we having to jump through hoops and make the developer jump through hoops when it's very clear to us that we need a good pedestrian crossing there? Why don't we just do it? Isn't that our job? Why must the developer do this? Why must we spend the time for him to do this? Why don't we just do it? Can someone answer that question?
That is the prerogative of this government to make those kind of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
However, it has been requested of this particular project, and since we are in this project, that's, unless you want to bring that in at the end of this meeting for us to look at that, we're just following the procedures and the recommendations that came.
Didn't we already evaluate this crossing in our pedestrian plan and say we need a light there? Didn't we already do that? We funded it once. So why must we do it again? We took the money away.
Mr.
Now it's not funded.
Have we done a study on this?
It's done through Public Works.
I understand that.
Study. I mean, I think it probably, this type of a more extensive 20-year complete streets analysis, obviously the intersection's a huge, it's kind of a cornerstone of that, but we really were interested in looking at the assurance of safety from intersection to intersection, from Barrett to Pulaski, to ensure not only pedestrian movements, but transit movements and bike movements and all of those other things. It's basically taking the traffic study that was completed as part of this zoning and adding another aspect to it. The majority of the work's been done, but specifically for this block.
But the developer's not going to be compelled to spend any money in order to satisfy the findings of that study.
That's correct.
So, again, why must the developer take this on? We probably do need a complete street study on Prince Avenue, much more than this particular portion. This particular portion needs a safe pedestrian crossing. That's what it needs. We know that. We decided that once already. So why wait for another study? Kelly, I'll ask you this question.
Sure. I think I'd be as happy as anybody to see safe passage along not only this two-block segment of Prince Avenue, but really the entirety of Prince Avenue as anybody in this room. And I think I'd be joined by a lot of folks. I think as Brad mentioned, this really creates sort of a more longitudinal look at this and says, in addition to something that we can do today, what can we do tomorrow and prospectively the day after? I think we are going to see other patterns of pedestrian activity that we haven't seen given the prospect of a grocery store, a restaurant, and a couple of other retail spaces here, as well as somewhere around 170 new residents. So that is a new wrinkle that we haven't looked at. So certainly, yes, if I could wave my Mao Zedong wand, I would say, yeah, I've got some ideas that I'd like to lay on the ground right now. But I also want justification for those ideas in terms of real movements of vehicles, transit operations, bicycles, and pedestrians.
Again, we have the fund, like I said, we have the prerogative to make that decision if we so choose. Mr. Harrod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I just have one quick question. So I guess it's probably for Commissioner Gertz, but on the exit onto Childs Street, where there's planning to be a left turn out only, is the plan just to basically have one of those signs with a left turn arrow with a big red line through it, or are you talking about physically constructing the apron of the road coming out from the development onto Childs in such a way that it becomes virtually impossible physically to turn right?
I'm talking about the signed prohibition, the sort of the latter item, the curb cut, really would have some emergency vehicle impacts
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, some of the emergency vehicle impact, I see that on page 155 of the packet, it's covered nicely for the project, but it doesn't cover the emergency vehicles and the fire services, emergency services or fire getting through Childs Street with this increased traffic as well as Pulaski. So I have those concerns. I'm not even prepared to start talking about that crosswalk on Prince Avenue that already has bustling business that we haven't put in a safer spot. So I look forward to Jerry us getting that going forward. I wanted to also just add that I hope that Mike Hamby's artwork is not being considered for that that area that you were talking about, there being a mural, and I that could be why he's recused himself. He could be in the running for that. But I'm just wanted to throw that out there too. But I came in here prepared to not vote for this project because there have been so many people in opposition and people in the packet. It's not unanimous in the community. The additional work that has happened since our agenda meeting is impressive to me. I don't want to hold up this piece of that puzzle hostage or try to get in the paper by being the one vote that doesn't want to support it. But I do want us to move on and address the streets and the traffic and get the puzzle looking better than it does. And once the construction fences go up, we still have traffic problems that we can be addressing and getting the safe crosswalks for the businesses that are currently there and the people who are currently walking and biking.
Mr. Gertz, last time.
I just want to make a motion for approval of the commission-defined option.
I'll second.
It has been motioned and second. Have we read the ordinance already? Read the ordinance, please.
An ordinance to amend the code of Athens-Clarke County, Georgia, with respect to rezoning the parcel of land at 134 Prince Avenue from CO Commercial Office to CD
EPD, Commercial Downtown West End Downtown Design Area Plan Development, and rezoning the parcel of land at 134 Child Street from CO Commercial Office zoning with condition to RM3PD Mixed Density Residential Plan Development and for other purposes.
Any further discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Baker, sir.
I just wanted to make a statement about Commissioner Wright's comments. If there's anyone up here that's voting against something just to get their name in the paper, they shouldn't be on this commission. I hope everybody up here is voting for or against something because it's the right thing to do in their mind. I really find that to be an interesting statement.
Mr. Naismith.
I wonder if there's anything we can do by amending this motion so that staff is instructed to provide us with a proposal for a safe pedestrian crosswalk and the funding for that proposal.
What I would say, just in terms of kind of awareness of the other things that are kind of on this government's slate of activities, is that at the work session a week from tonight, we're going to be looking at a number of crossings and street segments and safety options, and that's going to be followed by funding decisions by this body. So I think there is a package opportunity already moving forward. If the commission would like to fund the block that I live on, I'd be quite okay with that.
And I do believe Mr. Warrens did mention that the developer was willing to pay for the light. So that's, I think, some funding is maybe already available if we deal with this. It's just a matter of making a decision about doing the crossing.
Thank you.
No further discussion. All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. The motion carried. Item number 12 is a text amendment. And you want to...
An ordinance to amend the code of Athens-Clarke County, Georgia with respect to commercial front yard parking and for other purposes.
Okay. Discussion. Motion.
Discussion.
I'm sorry. Someone from the... Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Got ahead of myself. Mr. Dewey.
It's no problem, Tyler. 1075 West Broad Street. I'll be quick. I'm here to sort of speak against the Planning Commission recommendation. In many ways, it's sort of performative in that, I was at the Agenda Setting Commission. I know how you feel about this, so I'm not expecting to get up here and change a lot of minds. But we were invited by Brad Griffin to speak at the Planning Commission work agenda or work session, so I figured I'd come and sort of give much of the same talk that I gave there. And actually, I was a little bit surprised because many people were invited. It wasn't only Bike Athens, including the program chair for the ULI study of the Lexington corridor, William de St-Aubin. And one of the things he noted, I didn't really have to speak much, was that without other improvements, this adding 2 rows of front lot parking, it certainly doesn't make the corridor more walkable or bikeable, and it certainly has the potential to make it much less walkable and bikeable. And when you look at the ULI study, it says in there, and I can quote from it, it recommends allowing a minimum of 1 lane of parking in front of storefronts. With 2 lanes of parking, that moves potentially with the other buffers you have to include, the parking lanes, the travel lanes, it moves the storefronts at least 100 feet off the curb line, which all of a sudden becomes a large expanse of nothingness that you have to walk through along the corridor. It certainly doesn't provide any shade or viewing opportunities. So that's one comment. Secondly, in improving corridors, we certainly want an improvement for the people who are on those corridors, whether they're in a car, a bike, a bus, or whatever. One of the things I always think about as someone who rides his bike almost everywhere and almost spends 90% of my money in Athens based on destinations I make on my bike, my car doesn't buy anything. I buy things. It doesn't matter how I get there. I'm the one making the purchase. So if we want more people on the corridors, and I would agree with that fully, we want more people in local businesses and spending money locally, but we can be more careful about how we want people to get there. When we open up for 2 lanes of parking, we're saying we want you to drive. When we expand Lexington corridor to 9 lanes, as we're about to do, we tell people we want you to drive. So when we complain about traffic on the Lexington corridor, what we're saying is actually we want more traffic and we want more traffic jams instead of saying we want transportation options. That being said, I know this is just the first step of a process. I wish it were the last step, but I look forward to other improvements from the ULI study to make this a more livable corridor for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Good evening, Mayor, Commission. Tim Denson, 290 Midway Road. Yeah. Oh, excuse me.
I take it, Mr. Denson, this is not an item you want to speak to. Okay. Seeing no one else, we'll come behind the rail. Mr. Neesmith.
In terms of shade and walkability and people going to businesses, first of all, this does not obviate the requirement for sidewalks to be built. When someone is doing something to a plot of commercial land that allows them to put front yard parking in, then they'll also have to put in sidewalks and they'll have to put in street trees. So I don't really think that's an issue. In terms of people going to businesses, what we're after here is businesses that people can go to. What we're fighting is a situation we created in the year 2000 when we adopted a whole new zoning ordinance. And that zoning ordinance did not discriminate between urban commercial shopping corridors and suburban commercial shopping corridors. The regulations are the same, or were the same then. They're a little different now, but not much. This is the first step to recognize that we have suburban, auto-centric commercial business corridors that are in danger, well, let me rephrase that, where our regulations need to be improved so that they are attractive for the growth and redevelopment of businesses. This is one step. We are trying to attract new businesses to our corridors or expanding the businesses that are there now. This is one of the issues that's been identified, no front yard parking on these commercial suburban corridors that's preventing businesses from buying the land and building the businesses for people to go to. It is one step. So I think it's an important one. I think it's a first step. And so I'd like to move that we adopt this ordinance.
We'll have a second.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mr. Herrick. Further discussion, Mr. Mr. Hamby?
Sure. And I'm just going to sort of piggyback, I guess, on Commissioner Neesmith's in saying that while they currently are auto-centric corridors, that certainly doesn't mean, in my mind, that we're not going to hopefully look towards providing opportunities for other ways for people to get around. And I don't think Commissioner Neesmith disagrees with me on that as far as opportunities for some sidewalks or bike paths. Certainly, the Atlanta or Athens West Corridor has quite a few neighborhoods that live around there that I know a lot of people would like to walk to or bike to. So I think there's going to be some opportunities in the very near future as we're looking at some finances and SPLOST packages and whatnot that will allow us the opportunity to do so. And I will say, too, I saw the ULI report, and the ULI report for the Atlanta Highway also recommended looking at ways, as Commissioner Neesmith is doing, to encourage more business or to see what we can do to get more business in these corridors, and this certainly does this. But I don't think it opens the door like it has been for the past 30 years. I mean, you're not going to see a full-scale parking lot that you often see a lot of times that is made for the holiday shoppers that sit empty for the rest of the year. I certainly hope not, and I don't think this does this. So, at any rate, thank you.
Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I certainly understand the motivation for trying to change some of our regulations to make them more attractive to certain types of businesses. And I agree there are some aspects of auto-centric corridors that we have that we need to address. But I think that this is a step backwards. I think that we put certain things in place, commissions before this one put certain things in place to try and control development and have a vision for what our community should look like. And there's some desire to keep up with the Joneses, I think, because we've got Epps Bridge Parkway out there in Oconee County where they're putting everything up. But do we really want to look like that? Do we really want to be Gwinnett? I think that this is the first step to that sort of thing, and I think it's a step backwards. And you know, this commission has been slowly taking step backwards. There's we had a green building ordinance that was ready to be worked on and discussed and voted on, and it got shelved. There's a wetlands buffer ordinance that got just put away. Well, I guess it got voted down, but we're doing things in this community that are steps backwards, in my opinion, and I can't support this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Link, then Mr. Gertz, then Mr.
I have mixed feelings about this. You know, I understand the importance of the interconnectivity between those parcels, which this allows for. I think that's good, and I think that can encourage, you know, alternative transportation between parcels. There's nothing more annoying than going to a shopping center and wanting to go to the store that's right over there and knowing that you have to navigate over curbs and patches of ditches and whatever to get there. So I mean, I think I agree that, you know, that need for those interconnections is really important, and yeah, those interconnections probably should be happening in front of these structures. But I do have concerns about the the 2 rows of parking. 1 row of parking I could live with, but 2 rows, like Tyler said, it's a pretty thick expanse, and I do see this as a step backwards. I think it's maybe 1.5 steps forward and a step backwards. Maybe if this were in conjunction with other design guidelines that would mitigate those impacts, like greater tree plantings, or, I know we're looking at our sidewalk requirements, maybe, requirements to make those sidewalks be more multi-use paths, and the movement in kind of redevelopment of suburbia these days is to look at suburban areas as commercial nodes. And, I think of some place like the West Athens corridor, where Mitchell Bridge Road and Timothy Road come in. You have thousands and thousands and thousands of residents that are, literally a stone's throw from some really intense commercial shopping, opportunities to basically run all their errands within a mile of their homes, yet nobody's walking or biking to those commercial areas. And I feel like if we could look at things like this, these interconnected parcels, and combine them with, other things that make for a more positive pedestrian and cycling experience, and maybe this is something that should be addressed in our comprehensive plan, where it's a more holistic approach to solving the problem of accommodating the needs of businesses, as well as making for a more walkable, bikeable environment in our suburban communities. So I feel like this is, an incomplete picture of what needs to happen. And I fear that if we move forward with this, all the other things that could mitigate the negative impacts of this will never happen.
Mr. Hamby, then Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And certainly, I don't see this as being a step backwards. I mean, if it were a step backwards, we'd be allowing a parking lot with no trees and no sidewalks and whatever else. But that's certainly not the case here. And there has been an Athens West Corridor group that meets monthly now. Commissioner Neesmith has been part of that, as has Commissioner Gertz, and as has the mayor. And certainly, this group is encouraging the action that Commissioner Neesmith is supporting, and recognize that it could be good for business. The thing that Commissioner Neesmith pointed out is that, certainly if you don't have the business, there's not going to be anything to walk to or anything to drive to or any shopping to be had. And the ULI corridor study, Commissioner Link has already recommended a lot of the stuff that you said there, and I said that there's an opportunity that will present itself, hopefully at our next work session, that we'll be talking about, that will afford not only this corridor, but the Lexington corridor and downtown from that standpoint, to be able to do some of the things that we're asking to do. But for right now, we're looking at what is something small that we can do to encourage a business that may want to go onto Atlanta Highway. We're not trying to be like Epps Bridge Road. We're not doing that. We don't need to be. But what we are trying to do is to create our own identity, and that may mean that there could be a couple rows of parking out front. There could be at some point, hopefully in the near future, some sidewalks and bike paths that will get other people to these businesses. But the point is, you need the businesses to get to. And hopefully this is something that will help. There's some other things that are going to help. Certainly we are looking at ways to where we can improve the aesthetics of the corridor. I think that's important for businesses and for communities as well. But we'll get into that conversation another time.
Ms. Bell, I got you down, Mr. Neesmith, but I got a couple of people ahead of you.
Oh, sure, that's fine.
I want to say it. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Sims. First time to say that tonight. I've looked at this for a long time before we even had it on our agenda about front parking. Looking at things through the eyes of a business person, it's never made sense. The people that drive by, they see nothing. What does entice them to want to come to that business? The other part of our discussion tonight is regarding walking, biking. A lot of our customers that come don't do that because they live too far away. We have out of town. On the weekends, if you do go out Atlanta Highway, you see a lot of out-of-town cars. So that's the other part of the approach for us to look at this with a more solid business approach as much as anything else. I think we need to give it value.
Ms. Dickerson.
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to point out, I don't think that Lexington Highway or the Atlanta Highway ought to look like Prince Avenue or Boulevard or Millage Avenue for that matter. We have natural transition points in this community. When you leave the inner loop and you go out, it transitions into a more suburban area. And if you go out where I am, it transitions into farmland. So, you know, Commissioner Sims knows as well. I think Commissioner Bailey may even have some of that in his area. I think maybe even you have some, Kelly. So, and I think it's important that, you know, we all live and work where we want to live and work. And there are businesses who are coming to us saying they want to bring businesses to us, but we've tied their hands. We're not, and a lot of people say we're not very business friendly. I think this is not being very business friendly. There are specific types of businesses that are not going to go downtown Athens. They're not going to go within the loop. They're going to fit better outside that area, and we're prohibiting them from doing so. So I think we need to keep in mind that we're not, you know, when the comprehensive plan was put together, we wanted to have this sort of plan that everything looks the same. It's all, you know, it all looks the same. And while I agree that it would be nice to have bike lanes, I think it would be terribly inappropriate to put a bike lane on Lexington Road with 18-wheeler tractor trailers running through it. I think parallel to that road, perhaps, on a multi-use trail that we've talked about and the ULI talked about, but to put it right on the road, I think that's crazy. So I think we need to understand everything isn't going to look the same. There's going to be transition points, and I think this is a good step in the right direction. So,
thank you, ma'am. Okay, Mr. Neesmith.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. I hope you all know that I'm a great proponent of alternative transportation. I mean, I would love for Atlanta Highway to be a complete street, but we're a long way from doing that. It ain't going to happen anytime soon. I would like for us to have covered bus stops on Atlanta Highway. I mean, pity's sake. I mean, talk about something we need. And that is the alternative transportation out the Athens West Corridor, is the bus. And we've got 10 uncovered bus stops. Most of them don't even have a place to sit. So, you know, if you want to talk about taking care of some alternative transportation, let's look at that. This is an effort to attract and keep the businesses that we have on the land that we have in that commercial corridor. Plain and simple. It doesn't obviate any other improvements to that corridor. It makes an improvement that will attract business. Thank you.
Mr. Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. So, I mean, I don't want to reiterate what everybody else has said, but I mean, I think the key issue that we face on most of our corridors is redevelopment. They're already developed. And so what we are hearing from people who do commercial redevelopment is that this, although it may not be the largest thing that is preventing them from looking at redeveloping already developed pieces of property, it is certainly a consideration. And if we don't encourage redevelopment within our community, then developers will simply leapfrog to other communities. They will leapfrog our green belt out on the east side, or they will leapfrog into other counties on the west side, and neither of those is good for our community. So I think it's a very small step. I do not agree that it is backpedaling or taking us backwards. I think what this is doing is simply making it a little bit easier for commercial developers to redevelop pieces of property that already have something on it or on them.
Mr. Hammond?
Yeah, just one final quick point. Commissioner Harrington made me think of this. And not only would they leapfrog, but what we see certainly on Atlanta Highway is somebody will come in and redo a building, but they're going to stay within the code and redo the building as it exists. So I mean, really, you don't get the benefit of some really good improvements that help with the aesthetics. And I'm not suggesting that what they did to fix the building looks a lot better. It does, but certainly this could help get them what they want and help us get what we want as far as the aesthetics of the streets go.
Just one quick comment. I will, like I said, try to preside rather than comment, but at least one of the good things about this one is, as I was talking with Mr. Griffith earlier today, that all of you will have the opportunity to work on the next comprehensive plan So we'll have, you will have input into what you want to see for Athens-Clarke County, since I'm the only one that was in the 2000 plan to see what we have. It wasn't perfect, but it has worked for Athens-Clarke County, and we need to see some more improvement. So you'll have an opportunity to put your footprint on the next one that we do. With that being said, Ms. Spratlin, would you call the roll? Starting with Mr. Neesmith.
Neesmith?
Yes.
Hamby?
Yes.
Bale?
Yes.
Harrod?
Yes.
Dickerson?
Yes.
Gertz?
Yes.
Link?
No.
Wright?
Yes.
Bailey?
No.
7 yes, 2 no.
The motion now has passed. Now that completes all the business of the unified government. At this time, we will now have the fourth opportunity for anyone to make comments about any item that they would like to bring forward. Thank you.
Try that again. Sorry about that. Tim Denson, 290 Midway Road. I just wanted to speak to the item that did not show up on this month's agenda, which we expected it to be, the Anti-Discrimination Ordinance. Well, we were caught off guard when it got removed from the agenda. We've looked at this as a way to try to talk about this some more and have more discussion. And I hope that any restaurant owners who had concerns about it possibly being extended to restaurants also now feel confident that the ordinance would be a positive development for our entire county and not at all burdensome. Another thing I wanted to address, though, which has come up a number of times, is the idea that should the government be involved, local government be involved, or should this be solely independent? And I think that it's absolutely integral that the county government be involved for a number of reasons. For one thing, an Athens Civil Rights Committee, or whatever human relations committee we wanted to call it, would receive more respect if the county government was involved. I think also the difficulties in creating this committee would be easier navigated if the county government was also involved. And if we had a committee like the Athens Civil Rights Committee in place, it would be a fantastic avenue to build a diverse bench in which future board, authority, and commission members could be developed and step up into a higher position, which I know is a concern that Mayor Pro Tem brought up last time, which was a very valid concern. That's something that needs to be addressed. And I actually think this could be a great tool to make sure we actually are getting a more diverse pool of people sitting on these different boards and authorities and commissions. And my last point is why not? Doesn't the county government want to be involved in something like this? Like, really? I would think so. I mean, this is supposed to be a county government made up of the people, for the people, by the people. I think that the county government would need to have a role in something like this. And again, I would hope that there would be a strong desire to be a part of it. And another reason why I think this needs to happen is, and we've handed this all out to you guys, and I think you have it there in front of you, is the Human Rights Campaign did their annual Municipal Equality Index scorecards. And they ranked 8 cities in Georgia, along with hundreds across the country and even more across the world. And out of a rating of a possible 100, Athens, Georgia scored a 19 out of 100. That is the second, tied second to last in the entire state. And one of the main principles here, it says that we could get points for, would be to have a Human Rights Commission, such as what they have in Atlanta, but also in Columbus, Georgia. And you will find the bylaws in the second pocket there for the Columbus, how's it called? The Mayor's Committee on Diversity, Unity, and Prosperity, which would be very similar to what we are proposing also.
Thank you, Mr. Denson.
Thank you for your time, and we look forward to working with you guys further on this.
Hi, y'all. Jesse Houle, 260 North Chase Street. I, too, would like to speak about the Anti-Discrimination Ordinance we hope to have, the Bar Admittance Ordinance that I know y'all have been working on so far, and the Athens Civil Rights Committee that we'd like to see established as part of that. I hope that you'll find those packets we handed out helpful. I think there's good information in there, but it's by no means comprehensive. We certainly have more resources we'd be happy to share with you. I'm not sure how many of you got to see the article I wrote in the flagpole. I guess this was 3 issues ago now because there was one today. But if you look at the online version of that article, you'll see that there are a lot of hyperlinks in it. Some of them link to previous coverage going all the way back to January. Some of those articles cover the multiple demonstrations of hundreds of people in town who want to see this happen. But one of the links on there is to the ACLU's website, and another one on there is to the Human Rights Campaign's website. Both of those link to resources that I think will be valuable at painting an even broader picture than what this does. The study that is referenced here, you'll see in your packets. These are just covering like a couple of the cities here. We have Atlanta and Columbus. I know there's been a lot of skepticism around Atlanta's Human Relations Commission's effectiveness, but their ordinance is still fantastic, and there are plenty of other commissions around the country that are more effective, including the one in Michigan we mentioned last month. But I do think it speaks volumes that Atlanta is not the only city in Georgia, and that we're behind many others, including many that have a different reputation from ours. But what's really compelling about the study is that there are hundreds, I believe over 500 at this point, cities analyzed by the Human Rights Campaign. And you can see the report I linked to. It's about a 50-page report. I don't know if you'll want to pour through the whole thing like we did. But in it, it goes into lots of detail about what it means to get a 19. And I can tell you that it's not good. While it is ranked on a scale of 0 to 100, and very few cities anywhere score below 20, there are also some who get more than 100 points. Highest you can be awarded is 100, but there are all sorts of bonus points available. So some cities, like the dreaded Seattle, get like 119. So while I was initially disappointed to hear that the mayor pulled the ordinance from today's agenda, I and many of the people I've been working with are very enthused that we now have more time to hopefully talk with you all in more detail. So we look forward to meeting with more of you, hopefully working with more of you on this in the future. And tomorrow, Wednesday, at the library, Clark County Public Library, from 5 to 7 p.m., there will be an event hosted by Mocha Noah Johnson with the Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement. Many of us will be there to answer questions further, to discuss things in more detail. And there will also be some people there sharing their personal stories here in town, which, despite all the data in the world that may or may not compel you, is a very real experience that too many people are going through in this town every day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. Broderick Flanagan, 1645 East Broad Street. I, too, would like to echo what the previous speakers were saying before. I want to also thank you guys for your continued service, and also in welcoming the new assistant manager here to Athens, Georgia. I, too, am a little disappointed with not seeing the Anti-Discrimination Ordinance on this voting agenda for tonight. But I do look forward to having more time, as Jesse was saying, to discuss further and to come up with a better plan and maybe a more expansive ordinance to cover other establishments, as far as well as also implementing some type of civil rights or human rights council to create this the type of Athens that I believe we can all come to love and support by having more conscious businesses here in Athens. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Paul Aloniak, 445 Ruth Street, Athens. Today on online Banner Herald News had an article about the recent Athens-Clarke County meeting covering the infill housing plan. Among other things mentioned in the article, the subject of tiny houses being built or allowed in some infill vacant properties in Athens was mentioned. I'd like to correct or clarify some comments stated in the article. The main error in the article was a quote by Planning Department Director Brad Griffin, who unfortunately just left. He was quoted as saying that tiny houses on trailers, as opposed to the ones on foundations, are glorified airstreams, referring to a well-known type of RV or recreational vehicle. That couldn't be further from the truth. Tiny houses on wheels must meet building code standards that comply with every state in this country, because since they are on wheels, they can be moved to every state in this country. So they have to meet all the standards for every state. Alaska, Arizona, Alabama, New York, New Mexico, New Hampshire, everywhere. So Airstreams and other RVs are built to be traveled in, not lived in. That's a big difference. The article also quoted Mr. Griffin as saying that when and if tiny houses are allowed in Athens, they would need to be located in more rural areas of Athens-Clarke County, which is fine. Rather than downtown neighborhoods. There are lots of vacant properties along Tallahassee Road, Lexington Road, Danielsville Road, and probably others. There's many for sale for, oh God, bunches of acres, signs that have been posted for several years. I think the sellers would want to sell those properties. A problem is, though, that the developers in Athens are building student mega compounds, and that's all they're building, and parking decks. They're not addressing the dire need for affordable housing in Athens, for the Athens workforce. The lack of incentives for contractors to develop affordable housing for the permanent residents of Athens should be addressed. As it stands, developers and contractors are going to continue to infill, such as the Mark, formerly Armstrong Dobbs location, with the unneeded new student housing complexes, while the need for affordable houses for the people who stay in Athens for more than 4 years goes unaddressed, and long-term residents are being priced out of Athens as rents and housing costs continue to increase while incomes are static. Motivation for developers to build tiny house communities is sorely needed. A recent red and black letter to the editor from a UGA student stating that UGA students are the lifeblood of Athens and our town should make changes such as providing chain stores, etc., because the students want them. Well, the response from resident Athenians was strong and opposed the students' attitude. Athenians are passionate about our town and will not allow dramatic changes in the flavor our town does not want, and that will change it. I believe that most Athens residents will support tiny house communities in appropriate areas of Athens. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, my name is Ashley Na. I'm from 270 Cobb Street. And I also want to echo the thoughts on the Anti-Discrimination Ordinance that y'all are going to, well, yeah, that's here. I think that I read an article that Mayor Denson kind of said that this ordinance is good and clean as it is. I, number one, disagree with that statement. I think it's also important for everyone in the room to know that discrimination is not good and it's not clean. It is traumatizing and it's nasty and it's really complicated. Then I think that the infrastructure that we collectively decide to put into place needs to match the capacity needed to hold such complexity, and it needs to hold it well. Discrimination is not black or white. I'm not black or white, but this ordinance is without its CDO. It's black and white in that there are very clear signs that regulate acts of discrimination, and in clear establishments, such as bars, where regulation can occur so that they don't have to pay a fee, and establishments also exist very clearly without regulation, such as restaurants and everything else. There's a very clear demographic that's being protected by the ordinance as it stood the last time I was in this room, and that was just students who decided to attend bars that had dress codes or, I guess, could hold private parties. And then there's also a clear demographic in the community being left without protection. Everyone else, such as myself, who just attends restaurants and other bars that may not have dress codes on a daily basis, right? There was also a very clear, overwhelming public support for the county to play a part in forming a civil rights committee and for the ordinance to extend past bars, and there was also a clear absence of public opposition to that support. To disregard those needs and wants is to silence the community and our voices. I have been silenced before, and I know what it feels like. If any of you have been silenced, you too know what it feels like. I also know what it feels like to wonder if servers or customers are treating me poorly and everyone else with kindness because of my identity as a Korean American woman. And this is not just bartenders. I know what it feels like to voice my concerns to a group of people who don't know what discrimination feels like, so there's almost no way for them to feel for me. Instead of validating my feelings and hearing my experience for what I perceived it as, discrimination, bad attitudes were just sloughed off as accompanying bad days rather than bad judgment. I believe this is because there's an emotional sensitivity that needs to be present to pick up on microaggressions that are very much discrimination, and I want an ordinance that is good and clear, at least in the fact that such sensitivity and awareness is at the table where instances of discrimination are being assessed. And also to echo Ms. Wright, your point on legislation being needed to be spelled out properly. I think this was in reference to the Greenway going through the Oconee Cemetery. I think that this is a clear example of where fighting discrimination needs to be clearly spelled out, and it should not just be scribbled out as a barred mittens ordinance, which is what I see it as now. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name's Greg Wagstaff. I'm at 229 Kalima Avenue. I've just lived here for 3 years now. I'm retired, and I volunteer as an adult literacy tutor. I work with African Americans primarily who can't read and who suffer from the disparity of poverty in our town. And we have a bleak contrast between the wealth and poverty in this town that it's so easy to overlook by many of us. And I think that poverty is the cruelest form of discrimination, and we have our fair share here. We don't often like to look at it. That's plain. I think, though, that we need to address discrimination in a broader sense. The Human Rights Committee, the ACRC, the Civil Rights Committee, or a Human Relations type committee, it would be a step forward for our town to look at some of our problems and to consider those and not ignore them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Tommy Valentine. I live at 370 Cleveland Avenue. I know it's late, so I will try to be brief, but I just wanted to share a few things that I know and then ask a few things that I don't know. So the first thing I know is that growing up here in Athens, I know that I've seen discrimination against my friends that are people of color in restaurants. I know what it's like to be the only member of a party that's not asked for a receipt at a pizza restaurant because I was the one white person at the table. As someone who completed their MPA and who's working on their PhD in public administration, I know that it seems a stretch to say we're only limiting this to bars because the survey only mentioned bars. Well, the question mentioned bars, so of course the response would. And I would share that I don't know why we're pretending as if someone who said, yes, I've been discriminated in bars, would know the difference between what's organized as a bar and what's a restaurant that also has a bar capacity. I do know what it's like to be in my 20s and go out with a friend who's a person of color and have to make sure that we walk into the bar at the same time because we know that if I go in first, I might have to come back out because he might not get in because I'm wearing a fitted white shirt and his shirt might be baggy. I know we have commissioners and a mayor that wake up every morning wanting to do good. This is not a glamorous job. It's not a high-paying job. I know that all of you want to pass a good ordinance. But after the meeting last time, I just want to add that I also know something else, which is Commissioner Sims, after your remarks about Dairy Queen and about the varsity, I know that I've driven by those locations numerous times since then. And I've lived in Athens since I was 5, but those places suddenly had a poignancy and a darkness to them that I had never really considered. And I don't want the generation now or the generation to come to have locations that make them feel that way here in this town. I know that. And I also know that the comments made about you can't change racism until you change people's hearts, I agree. But I also know that we get further when we nudge. And I know that we can nudge in the direction of the positive. I just want to say that I know all of you have difficult decisions, and I know that it's not something that's being voted on tonight, and there's a lot of discussion. And I think there's even a silver lining here in the fact that more time will be able to be spent ironing this out. But I'll just say this as another I don't know. I know a lot of entrepreneurs in Athens. I can't imagine a restaurant owner that would consider closing because they have to put a poster up. And I can't imagine an entrepreneur that was considering opening a restaurant that would decide not to because they have to put a poster up. I would thank all of you for your time. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you, Mr. Valentine.
Anyone else? Seeing no one else, we will come behind the rail. Let's see, how did this work go? It says, report from the Mayor Pro Tem. Well, I don't have a report tonight. One of the things that I do want to make a comment about is the fact that, if we had that particular item on the agenda tonight, then you would have thought that we were trying to hurry up to get it done. So we actually do listen to what the people out there say. And we still get criticized for listening. So please, be patient. Because you say you want a better product. If we had brought the product in that was there, you wouldn't have been satisfied with it. So now, this is the apple. You get another bite at it. Okay? We're going to, Mr. Manager, do you have anything?
No, sir.
Mr. Attorney?
Nothing, thanks.
Our auditor is on vacation this week, so that's why she's not here. We're going to start with Ms. Link, and we're going to end with Ms. Wright.
I want to thank you guys for this. I was actually happy to see the Anti-Discrimination Ordinance pulled, so we can have an opportunity to see more information like this. There is a lot of quantitative and qualitative information out there about this issue, and there are plenty of other communities that have tackled it and done a good job of tackling it, and I think we can follow in their footsteps. I also want to remind folks that there is a Mayor and Commission work session next week, the 13th, in the Doherty Street building at 5:30, and we'll be looking at bike and pedestrian plans and talking about our SPLOST, our Transportation Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax opportunity, an opportunity to get some more transportation projects funded. And also we'll be talking about infill housing, and I know that Ms. Loniak talked about tiny homes, and that kind of came up in the Planning Commission's discussion of it. So it'll be interesting to see where our discussion leads on that. So I hope folks will attend those work sessions because there's a lot of information to be learned and that can help inform any comments you might have as these things come up for a vote. Thanks.
Nothing tonight, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I have an invitation. I would imagine everybody in this room remembers where they were on September 11th, and there is a memorial. There's a constituent in my district, Bob Hart, who created a trail, opened it about 5 years ago. It took him about 10 years to build it. It's down Morton Farm Lane at 320 Morton Farm Lane. I'll make a copy and put it in everybody's boxes so you'll have the address, and I can also email it to anybody that would like. It starts Sunday, September 11th at 4 o'clock. Suggest you start arriving as early as 3:15 because it will be very crowded. There'll be music, there'll be songs sung, readings, but it's a pretty powerful trail. It's got all the names of all the people, different memorials for the different locations of the attacks. But it's something that I think would be worthwhile spending time at. So if you can join us, I'd encourage you to do so. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Terrett?
No tengo nada.
Ms. Bell?
I want to commend our mayor for what she did by pulling the discrimination. I want you to know that she did it for the right reasons. That was part of my campaign promise, was that you do the right thing for the right reasons, and she did that. And she did it because of every single person in this room, every single person that's been in this room tonight, and she did it for our Mayor Pro Tem and all of us commissioners and all of the managers, and I appreciate her doing that. And I think sooner or later you will realize what it was meant for.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just a couple of, one announcement and one, I guess, question or thought. Next Thursday, September 15th, the West Broad stakeholder group will be holding a public input session with their consultant, Lord Ake, and it's one of the, there you go, three name firm, Lord Ake and Sargent. And they will be taking input about what sort of vision the stakeholders and certainly, more importantly, the community neighbors around there would like to see for the area. I'm sorry, but I don't have the location right in front of me or the time, but I will email that to all of y'all so that you know it, and you will hear more about it as it unfolds. Unless Manager Williams, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the place and time. I think it's at Hill Chapel, but I wasn't going to say that without
let's
knowing
confirm
for
that.
sure. Yeah. So at any rate, I will email that to y'all, and if y'all could be so kind as to spread it around to your constituents and folks who may have an interest in the visioning process for West Broad. The second thing is, as has been mentioned, we will be talking about SPLOST at our next work session, the long-awaited discussion on SPLOST, where we've all spent 3 times the amount of money that we'll be receiving. But anyway, I'm hopeful that we will lay out a process that will certainly involve citizens in helping us determine what those projects are, even though we have expressed some preference, but it's really up to the voters of the county to determine what those projects are going to be and if they're going to be. But one of the things I was hoping to see during the presentation from staff, and I don't know if this will be part of it, is, traditionally we've been doing SPLOST where we pay as you go, or you earn the money first and then you do what you want to do. And it does seem at times that system may have worked well, but at times it does seem that we, by the time we get ready to do a project, the expenses of the building have increased and all sorts of things have happened. So what I'm hoping to see is what would the scenario look like if we have a certain amount of dollars available to us over a 5-year period, what it would look like if we were to borrow that money, and of course there's interest involved in that, and then get all the projects done, hopefully within the time frame of that SPLOST project. For one, I think it does a couple of things. It allows people who actually voted on the projects to see the projects come to fruition. And secondly, I think it builds another level of confidence in SPLOST that, we're getting these projects done. But I also think they will be projects that will matter to the community and make a difference. So at any rate, my request is to include a scenario about borrowing the money.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Neesmith.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Well, first of all, I want to thank Athens for everyone for this document here from the Human Rights Campaign Corporation. This spells out what we want to do. If you look at this, the way the scoring is done, non-discrimination laws, municipality as an employer, municipal services, et cetera, it lays out exactly what policies we need to look at in order to be a more just, welcoming community. We need to look at this. This is every bit as important as the Human Rights Commission, because what the Human Rights Commission is going to do is tell us we need to do these things. Now we see some very good ideas. And Atlanta scored 100. Actually, they scored 106. And they've done all these things. So we've got model legislation just down the street that we can go look at and begin to implement. So I hope that we can take that course as our next step in human rights in Athens, Georgia. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I don't have anything this evening. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mayor Pro Tem, you can count on me to make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned.